Hello Year 9, this is Mrs. Patel and I'll be going through one of the poems from the Power and Conflict cluster that you've been studying since the Easter holidays. Now these are really important because they're part of the literature exam that you'll be sitting at the end of Year 10, so next year. So it's really important that you get a basic understanding of the poems now whilst you're at home so that the teachers can then go through them in more detail once you return in September. Now, the poem that I'm going to be focusing on today is the Emigree. So before we start, could I ask you to pause and make sure you've got all your materials ready? That means, can you make sure you have a pen, please, some paper, and your remote learning booklet on the Emigree as well. Now this could be on the screen, but if you've got a printed copy, even better. If not, that's fine, just use your paper because all the questions will be on there as well as this PowerPoint. Right, so you should now have all your materials ready. The first thing I'd like to focus on is a quick recap of the previous poems that you've studied. Now all of these booklets have been provided by your teacher, so there's been about 5 poems that you've studied so far. Let's do a quick recap just to make sure that you understand the poems and you remember some of the content from them. Can you spend about 2 minutes answering these questions on the screen, and then when you're ready, move to the next screen to go through the answers. Right, let's go through the answers now. So, number 1, any of these quotations will suffice. A stranger's features faintly start to twist. A half-formed ghost. Or 100 agonies in black and white. Number 2, the answer is Ozymandias. Number 3, the speaker in the prelude is afraid of nature and its immense power. Number 4, it is implied that the Duke has his wife, the Duchess, murdered. And the quotation to help you with that, if you've got this even better, is all smiles stopped. And for number 5, the word that's repeated 5 times is every. And the quotation or the stanza reads, in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, to highlight the pain and sorrow throughout London. So let's start going through the poem for today, and that's called The Emigree by Carol Rumans. Okay, now the first thing I'd like you to do is just start to think about the poems that you've been reading about. They're all to do with power and conflict. That's why they're part of the Power and Conflict cluster. So just having to think about those 2 words. So when we look at the title in a moment, I want you to think about those words and how this poem might fit into that. Okay, so please move to the next slide now. So I would like you to, first of all, make some predictions based on the title, The Emigree. And I want you to thinking about exploding the title, looking at the questions on the slide to help you as well. So these are some of the things that give you some ideas to help you with any of the poems in the cluster, but it gives you a chance to explode the poem as well. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to look at this and make predictions and spend no more than 5 minutes, and then we'll go through them on the next slide. So let's go through our predictions. Now it's important to understand there's no right or wrong answers at the moment because we're learning about the poems from scratch. The things that I want you to look at is the words and seeing if you can get any hints or clues about the words. The word that hopefully you should have picked up is emigree, and that it looks very similar to the word emigrant. Now this is a key really, because an emigrant is somebody who's had to leave a country that they've been born into because usually of war. Okay, now the word emigree is the feminine form of the French term for a woman that's had to emigrate. So it already gives us clues that the speaker is going to be female. Now, if you look on the slide, there's a bit more information as well. So somebody who's an immigrant might never ever feel like they feel comfortable in the country that they've moved to, because their home might belong to the place where they were born. Okay, and that means that sometimes somebody feels quite displaced, and that means that they often recall memories of their country, their birth country as well. Okay, it might be that Rumans has left all this quite universal, ambiguous, where you don't quite know what country she's talking about, on purpose, because it needs to be a universal message. So it could be about anyone who's had to flee from any war-torn country. So let's go through our predictions. Now, it's really important to understand that there's no right or wrong answers at the moment, because we're just learning. The only thing that I want you to focus on is looking at words and what you think they might suggest, or their meanings behind them. So hopefully you picked up on the word emigree and thought, actually it sounds a little bit like the word emigrant. Okay, emigrant is really important here, because this is somebody who's had to leave their country of birth and settle somewhere else. And it could be because they've left because of political reasons. Their country is a war zone, so they have no choice. Now, the word emigree in this example is in the feminine form, and that's why it's got a French accent on top of the E as well. And it means a woman who's emigrating. And it could be because they've covered some. So the next task is an independent task. I'd like you to summarise the information on the screen or in your booklet using 4 bullet points. I'm going to ask you to do this in no more than 5 minutes, and then move on to the next slide. Now it's time to read the poem The Emigree and answer some comprehension questions, just to see your base understanding of the poem. So what I'd like you to do is to click on the link on the right hand side, and that's a BBC bite-size link which shows you a video with someone reading the poem as a background as well. Now that you've read and heard the poem, it's time to summarise the information. Now, I'd like you to have a think about what's happening in the poem. Can you explain your ideas in no more than 4 sentences? Just a quick summary of the poem in your own words. The second question is, why do you think this city is suffering? And the final one, how do you think the speaker is presented in the poem? And I'd like you to spend 10 minutes on this task. Now, let's go through the poem briefly. So the first thing to note that's particularly important is that this poem is not autobiographical. Rumans was born and raised in London, so she's not an immigrant, but she would have met and interviewed a lot of people which would have inspired her to write this poem. And that's one of the reasons why there's no specific details about the country that she's talking about. And we mentioned earlier that this could be a universal message, but it could also show that sometimes people remember things how they want to, and in this case the memories are from childhood. Therefore they could be very idealized, almost like a fairy tale. The second thing that I'm hoping that you've noticed is that this country is suffering due to a war. The word tank should have signalled this to you, and also shown you that it would be very difficult for normal citizens to take control over the situation, which is why a lot of people have to flee these countries. There's a bit more information on the slide that you can read through as well. And then when you're ready, please move on to the next slide. Okay, so the next independent task is about tricky vocab from the poem. So what I'd like you to do is have a look at the words on the left hand side. They're all from the poem. And then I've added the definitions for each of the words and where they appear in the poem, so where they are in context. And I'd like you to think about what these words mean. What's the effect of them? Why has the writer used these words? All words are used for a certain purpose, so these are key words to focus on, and it will help you with your zooming in analysis. I'd like you to complete this task in about 10 minutes, and once you've finished, move on to the next task and slide. Okay, so the next independent task will take you a little bit longer, 30 minutes to be precise. Now what I'd like you to do is look at each stanza in detail and annotate the poem using the questions on the slides or in your booklet. Okay, so all of them to do with a certain line or a word. If you just go through them, it will take you a while to do this task, but this will give you a deeper understanding of each of the lines. Right, the next task is some vocabulary work. I'd like you to look at the word on the screen, which is exile, and start thinking about how this word could be used for this poem. And there's a few little tasks for you to do as well alongside it. This is a nice, easy task. What I'd like you to do is find the quotes that match these statements. The first one has been done for you. So have a think about Rumans' big ideas for the Emigree. What is her overall message? What themes does this poem cover? Have a think about these ones in front of you, which ones fit in well, and then we'll go through the answers on the next slide. So unless you have a target of a grade 7 to 9, this is the final task for everyone. If you have got a target of a 7 to 9, can you please complete the optional task in the booklet where you need to watch a YouTube clip which goes into more detail about the poem, just to help push yourselves. But everyone needs to complete this task so that we can consolidate our understanding of the poem. So our essay question for this poem is, how does Carol Rumans present conflict in the poem? Now I've just used the word conflict, which is taken from the anthology, the cluster title, because it fits in with most of the poems that we're studying. And we're going to look at an essay structure first of all, and then we're going to look at a model answer. So the first thing that's really important when you're writing a paragraph, and there only needs to be 2 paragraphs for this task, but I'd like them to be detailed paragraphs, is to ensure that you have a clear topic sentence. And this means that you signal to the reader, your teacher, and the examiner that this is what your paragraph is going to be about. So the model paragraph at the bottom is about the impact that war has on a country, and then I'll have quotes to support that. Okay. Next, make sure that you use quotations, or if you can't remember quotations, textual references is okay as well, and your teacher will go into more detail about that next year. But even if you can't remember a quotation exactly, but you remember a summary of it, that's fine as well. Okay, if you do know the quotation, remember you can zoom in on certain words, which you'll see in the example as well. And don't forget to think about why that word's being used, what the effect of that word is, because all words have been chosen for a particular purpose, so there's always something to say about every word. And the final thing that I'd like you to think about is contextual information. And this could be about the time period, or in this case, it could be about what Rumens, the poet, is trying to teach us or reveal. Okay. Now, let's have a look at this model paragraph. So the first thing is the topic sentence. So Rumens' poem shows the impact that war can have on a country. So I know that I'm going to talk about the effects of war in this paragraph, and my quotations need to be about this. At first, the speaker states the word once, suggesting it is like something at the start of a fairy tale, implying that our protagonist has only happy memories of where she has come from. It could also reveal that the speaker's memories are somewhat romanticized because they still view it from a child's perspective. So I take a quotation, I make an inference about it, and then I make an additional inference because there's a little bit more to say about it. And then I look at another section, but then it has a tone of sadness and despair in it, that nothing that once was still is because of the tyrants and tanks that have consumed it. The plural noun tyrants reveals an anonymous enemy, or even an ambiguous one, because maybe, like I said to you earlier, that this is a universal message about dictators who have created upheaval in many countries who face the same situation. The description of a tank demonstrates the ferocity and power that comes with these tyrants, as normal civilians are unable to battle with huge vehicles which could crush them and their homes with little effort if they do not adhere to their rules. So I'd like you to have a go at writing 2 paragraphs. We've gone through quite a few quotations in this pack as well. So it's up to you which ones you use. Think about your having a clear topic sentence relating to the question conflict, and then zooming in on the quotations as well. Once you've done that, you can share your answers with your teacher, who will then have a look at them and will then send some whole class feedback sheets your way. Okay, thank you for listening, and your next poem will be Tissue.